Hi there, thanks so much for joining me for this webinar on ATS myths debunked. It is one of my favourite subjects to talk about, and probably some of the things that I get asked the most about is ATS's applicant tracking systems. I think you can use it either as ATS or ATS's, so I'm going to use it interchangeably, and I hope no one gets confused. So ATS applicant tracking system is what we're going to be talking about in this webinar. What we're going to cover is some of those really common myths that I hear about when I'm talking to people, that I see people writing about on LinkedIn, that I think that people are just become almost like an urban myth. So what are we going to cover? We're going to firstly look at the keywords and how is an ATS filtering you out on keywords alone. And in each of these myths, actually, I'm going to give you a little behind the scenes tour, if you like, of what actually happens. The other thing we're going to look at is whether or not you need an ATS compliant CV. That's a very common myth that I'm going to happily debunk. We're going to talk about how an ATS is rejecting you from an age perspective, whether you're too young or too old or somewhere in between. And we're going to talk about whether or not an ATS is auto rejecting you and not reading you based on summaries and cover letters and things like that. So first up, who am I and how am I qualified to run this webinar? Well, as I said, my name is Nicole Harlow. I run the Digital Talent Lab and Career Architect. I've been recruiting here in Sydney for about 10 years now, and I've been using ATS for as long as I've been recruiting. I also run the Career Architect, which is a career coaching business for people from all walks of life. I recruit predominantly in the digital space, but I help people across a really broad remit when it comes to coaching and the next steps in their careers. That could be anything from CVs to interview prep to planning out their next steps for the next 5 years. So it's really broad, it's really tailored. I do have a couple of masterclasses on there, particularly a job search masterclass. If you're thinking about a new role for the new year, now could be the right time to do that job search masterclass. But in terms of ATSs, I think I've used about 5 or 6 in those 10 years. Sounds a lot. Some businesses have changed. I've changed recruitment software myself twice, and they've been everything from great, fantastic to pretty ordinary. I'm using one at the moment. It's called Recruit Wizard. It's Australian owned, which I really like. But essentially, I do run a CRM system as well, but essentially my ATS is a CRM system. It is where I track any of the roles that I'm working on, any of the opportunities that are there that I'm talking to people about, any roles that I've got advertised. As most people know, I very rarely advertise, but it's a way of me tracking a person through the recruitment process. Sometimes I can share different parts of that process with hiring managers and those decision makers, but essentially it is just tracking you through different parts of that recruitment process. Recruitment systems haven't really changed that much in that 10 years. Yes, there's more automation nowadays, but not really that much more, probably a little bit more from a marketing perspective. And I also do think a lot of what we're seeing as AI, what people think is AI at the moment, is actually just automation. I'm happy to be proved wrong on this, but most of the recruitment systems that I see being in place, particularly here in Australia, are very much driven by a human. So we'll talk more about that. So let's start with myth number 1, that the ATS is filtering you out based on keywords. So to a certain extent, this is true. So what happens behind the scenes? So I pop an ad up on Seek or LinkedIn or any other ad software, ad platform, and you go ahead, let's say you apply for a role that's been advertised. You then go into an ATS from that application. If it's something like Seek or Indeed, or actually any of the job platforms, you will go automatically into that system, into that job, and that's where the recruiter tracks that progress of your application for that particular role. It may also go up into an ATS and you become part of, that's where it's more like a CRM in my mind, where you and I might start talking, you send me your CV, it's not for any particular role. I will upload it into my ATS/CRM. I'll code it, and then the next time I'm looking for or I'm filling particular roles, I will do searches based on keywords. So this is where the keywords are important. But you have to think, how is it being used? That and what is the person looking for? So if a new role comes across my desk, I have one at the moment that is for a growth marketing manager. I will still type in things like growth marketing manager, growth. I will still put in things like digital, still put in search marketing. I will put in all of those keywords. You can actually upload a job description and then match that towards CVs. But it's all about those keywords that are important and relevant to the role and that someone would be inputting as a search function, pretty much. That's what you've got to think of it. So ATSs are a tool. It's the software that we use to track and keep up to date with what's happening in the recruitment process. So it's definitely about those searchable terms and those searchable keywords. So you can see what those relevant keywords would be from the probably what you see in an advertisement. Let's face it, most job ads these days are just JDs posted on Seek or posted on LinkedIn. And that's going to give you a really big clue as to what is that person going to put in as those searchable terms for their ATS to then come and I don't like to say the word spit out, it sounds too aggressive, but for their ATS to then most often rank candidates based on how and when they've used those keywords. So if you've got digital marketing all over your CV, and that's one of the things that I put in, you're going to rank higher than someone that doesn't have it at all. So if you think about what is being searched, and then how are you inputting that into your CV? But it is still run by humans. So I'm yet to see an ATS, and again, I'd love it if there is one out there that is auto rejecting people just based on what it can read. I don't think that that is happening where it's saying, if you're not finding any of this, please auto reject. I think it is still a human going into each part of that process and categorizing you based on your application and how well you're ranking for it, if that makes sense. So, what are the things to consider with keywords? Is think about what keywords are definitely still important, but what is it that's going to be searched? It is still a human that's driving it, even if it is a human uploading that JD. And that JD was written by a human, or maybe Chat GPT, but you get what I mean. It's still human led. So you still have to use those keywords naturally. I did see a LinkedIn post today that said that you could put it all in white text at the bottom of your CV. Don't do that. That's sort of 1990 craziness. Not 1980, obviously. 1990s, 2000 craziness, right? So don't do that. It still has to be naturally within your CV. But do think about how strategically you're using keywords and searchable terms. And lastly, don't blame the ATS. That's one thing I want you to remember through all of this. Okay, myth number 2, that you need an ATS compliant CV. I'm going to get a t-shirt. People know me for knowing my numbers t-shirts. I'm going to get one to say this. You do not need an ATS compliant CV or resume. There are so many people that are selling this as a service, and people are paying good money to have their CVs rewritten to be ATS compliant. And I'm a big believer that yes, you can get coaching. I sell coaching for CVs, but it's just this whole thing of being ATS compliant that really gets my goat. I don't think that there is such a thing. I have even asked software businesses that say that they can make you an ATS compliant CV as to what makes it compliant. And they just say the same things that I say you need to have in your CV. Good formatting, consistent formatting, numbers, keywords, all of the things that I'm saying. I don't believe there is such a thing as an ATS compliant CV. You definitely shouldn't be paying for it. And if you are, I'd want to know what makes it ATS compliant. So there are some formats that do go haywire in in an ATS system. But most often you will know this when you upload it. I've seen it in mine. The information is still all there. So you would actually still be found because the ATS doesn't care if your column's over here on the on the right hand side where it's meant to be on the left or anything like that. It just doesn't transpose it very well, so it doesn't look as nice. But it should still be picking up on those keywords, right? And so graphics, making a logo out of your initial can make it go a bit ugly, makes your CV not look as well formatted. So that's just a couple of things to consider. But otherwise, please don't pay money for an ATS compliant resume. What are the key things to consider with this? As I said, around the formats, so different formats will parse differently. Sometimes you can see this, when you upload a CV into an ATS and it doesn't put the information where it's meant to be and you've got to type it all over again. That could mean that it's not picking it up correctly. So bear that in mind. Ditch any graphics like pie charts or any sort of charting that you've used to show your career trajectory or anything like that, or a logo, as I said, made out of your initials. Anything like that I would get rid of. Keep it really clean. Again, that's for the human eye as well, right? If you have paid for an ATS compliant CV, I would love for you to ask what has made it compliant and what is the success rate of that ATS compliant CV. Often what you do get if you are paying for that service is a really plain text, I don't mean to say old fashioned, but less modern CV format that I would see that could possibly work well in some very traditional businesses. But if I see it, then they're often really verbose in their wording as well. If I was to see it, and I'm reading every CV that comes into my desk, right? If I was to see it, I wouldn't want to read further. So just bear that in mind, ask some questions. And again, don't blame the ATS if your CV is not getting through. Well, maybe you should if you've paid money for an ATS compliant one. So myth number 3 is that the ATS will auto reject, I'll say older candidates, because that is what most of my market is people who are in their 40s and 50s and feeling some of that age discrimination. But I did read some really interesting statistics across Gen Z as well. And there was staggering amounts of Gen Z or Gen Z employees being let go or losing their roles in greater numbers than a lot of their other generational counterparts. So let's say this is for either you're younger or older, irrelevant for the point here that I'm trying to make. The ATS can't make those biased decisions like a human can. And in my mind, it's actually beneficial for this sort of highly AI driven recruitment, if you like, because technology is never biased. That's a human that is making that. No one is going to put in there, auto reject people who have graduated university in 1992 or earlier, right? So again, happy to be proven wrong, but I really don't see that happening. So the ATS and the age discrimination is actually driven by the human that is driving the ATS. They're human-led decisions. There are some things you can do to avoid ageism. So let's quickly look at those. So any of this, I did a LinkedIn post on this last week. When you describe yourself as seasoned, it's probably one of my absolute pet hates. I don't even like KFC, and I think of KFC every time someone does it. So please don't describe yourself as seasoned. I don't think you need to be putting, and is it an adjective, on in front of what you do. You can say experienced if you like, but I think that's pretty much a given. So avoid saying things like you have 20 years experience. Again, this will depend on the role that you're going for. If you're going to be the managing director of a large enterprise sized business and it's going to need you to have that experience, absolutely have it in. But if you're a senior digital marketing manager, whether you've got 8 years experience or 4 or 15 or 22, doesn't really matter. It's experience, the hands-on piece with the tools that are required for that role and the results. What have you delivered in that role? You can avoid having the year that you graduated university if you like. As I said, ageism is really a human led decision. So I would remove the year that you graduated university. Again, it's completely irrelevant whether it was, again, this could be for you if you graduated in 92, or it could be if you graduated in 2022, right? And you can avoid definitely having your year of graduation on there, and get rid of any experience. I did say there from the 80s and 90s, but let's face it, the early 2000s was 20 years ago as well. So I think most people have a natural mark in their CV at 10 years that they can then have, further previous experience available upon request, or you can just leave it out, or you can have, short bullet points around what you have done in a previous life, up to you. But I think at that 10-year mark, I would be cutting it off. So just to quickly recap on how to avoid that ageism, don't even bring it into play. So I would be leading with your experience and your results. So it's not even a consideration. It's almost as if that person, that the ATS can't tell how old you are. Using more modern language and ways of describing yourself. So things like seasoned, things like experienced, using any sort of descriptive word other than, result, I'd be putting results driven or savvy if you must, but I wouldn't be putting those descriptive words on you that are going to age you. And just think about that most recent experience that is going to be the most relevant to the roles that you're applying for. And again, don't blame the ATS, because this is not on the ATS. So the fourth myth that I'm going to debunk today is that the ATS can't or won't read summaries. I was going to say cover letters and summaries, but I don't necessarily think that it's going to parse a cover letter. If someone is to email me their CV, I don't always upload their cover letter. So it's just worth remembering. I again have done a LinkedIn post recently on why do we still use cover letters. They were used because we would be mailing in with a postage stamp in an envelope our CV back in the day. There's me aging myself, right? But then a cover letter was necessary because it was like, here's the job I'm applying for that I saw in the Sydney Morning Herald on Saturday. Otherwise, they're like, what role is this person applying for? Whereas nowadays, you're most often applying for something on a job board, or at least emailing someone with, hey, I saw your digital marketing role and here's my application. So you don't really need a cover letter anymore. A lot of jobs are asking for it. I get that. Obviously, then include it. But again, be thinking of keywords, results, language of leaders, and what is going to be searched. But I don't really think that the cover letter is going to come into play as much as, the rest of your CV. But here's where I'm going to debunk some of the myths around it, is that your summary is just like any other part of your CV. So if an ATS is going to be looking for keywords, it makes sense then that your summary should be including those keywords that would be searched for that particular opportunity. It's a great way of adding those keywords and the relevant keywords that someone is going to search for. No matter what, I keep saying this, that the content is key regardless of whether it's a human reading it first or an ATS. It's about the way that you're talking about your experience, the way that you're talking about the results that you've achieved. So just think about how it all happens in the background. Your summary, I think that I did see people saying whether or not we should still be doing them. They are quite old fashioned, but I think that professional summary at the top, when it's done well, can be really enticing for someone to read further. There's going to be a human reading your CV really early into the process, right? People think that it's AI and an ATS all the way through until the end of a hiring manager coming back and saying, no, that person's not right, or yes, we're going to interview them for the first time, whatever. A human comes into this process really quickly. So it is still important. I think that summary, there was a LinkedIn post from me today around what you should be including in there and the language that you should be using in there. So it's important to me anyway, whether there's ATS involved or not. So as I said, that summary is really important. The content is key. It's about showing what you've done, how you've done it, where you've done it. And again, don't blame the ATS for it, not you not getting an interview. It's not on the ATS is basically what I'm saying. Normally when I do these workshops live, we jump to a online Q&A. But what I wanted to do was just to recap some of those key points that I've made. So an ATS doesn't reject people per se. It organizes and filters them for us as recruiters to review. So you may get automatically rejected because you don't have a particular skill set, but it is still a human that is making that decision to reject you. It's all about the formatting and the accuracy and the readability of your CV. So don't overthink the keyword bit and have keywords scattered throughout your CV that make no sense. It's still got to be relevant and important to that particular role, if that makes sense. And then age bias is a human factor, not an ATS limitation. So just worthwhile remembering that. It's not the ATS's fault. So everything of wanting more from what I can offer you in your job search or with your career, here's how we can work together. One-on-one, that's probably the most popular way in which people reach out and spend some time with me so we can have a really tailored discussion about what's next for you. It could be about your resume. It might be about your LinkedIn. It might be a combination of all of those things. It might be that you're struggling to interview well. It might be that you're thinking, what's next for me? So I run hour by hour. You can book in a 15-minute strategy call with me and we can see if we're a good fit to work with each other. I do have a job search masterclass. So as I said, if you're thinking of a new role for the new year, there's something like 10 working weeks left of this year. So if you're thinking that you want to get everything in order for a new role for 2025, the job search masterclass, this could be a really good time to be doing it. So it's 3 weeks, 6 modules, and in the end, a great new role for you. And you can also just follow me on LinkedIn. So I do post almost every day some actionable tips and tricks that you can be doing to change your career, change your CV, whatever. It's always pretty broad and varied and aimed almost 100% at candidates, job seekers, people in roles rather than advice for recruiters or for people hiring. So hopefully that helps you. You can see me at careerarchitect.com.au. And again, thanks so much for joining us. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.